Hi, this is Henning from FlipNormals. In this video, we are going to give you a refresher as to how Zbrush works. This is a bit of a different video because in this one, we actually assume that you've used Zbrush beforehand, but that you haven't used it in a while. This is an issue we see all the time with artists. It might be a case where you're a student and you've worked with Zbrush for a school project and you haven't touched it for 6 months, or you're a freelancer and you touch Zbrush every blood moon in order to just do some sculpting on it. And one of the key things about Zbrush is that the UI and the UX is very tricky. It's one of these software where you forget everything the moment you've closed it down, or at least if you aren't using regularly. So this is simply a refresher to where things are and some general concepts. Now, before we get into the full series, if you are interested in learning Zbrush properly, like as a full introduction, we have our Introduction to Zbrush 2020. This covers how to use the latest version of Zbrush, and it's more than 7.5 hours of content going through all the features we need. We also have a section at the end where we sculpt this one from scratch as well. So if you're interested in learning Zbrush A to Z, make sure to check this one out. Link in the description. So this is what Zbrush looks like the first time you open it up. You're going to see this weird canvas, and we have the Lightbox open. The Lightbox is essentially a browser. We don't use this a whole lot, but once you do need some resources, it can be quite handy. You can just go through here and find different brushes, textures, alpha. We can hide it by clicking on the Lightbox icon, or we can click the comma key to toggle it on and off. I use this quite a lot when it comes to the skin kit. I have all the brushes right here, but apart from that, I don't use that a whole lot. Next up, we have the concept of 2.5D. This is not something we're really going to cover. The only thing we're going to cover is that you can clear this with the hotkey Ctrl N. Ctrl N for document and new. So new document, Ctrl N. The way we get started with a 3D model in Zbrush is that we have to go into edit mode and we have to convert it to a polymesh 3D. So edit mode is something you should never really exit. You should always be in edit mode. If we go click on the sphere, or on a tool. If you don't have this menu open, you can simply go on a tool and just drag it over like so. And then you'll have the tool menu. If you can't see it still, you can still just click on this guy right here, the divider, and that's going to open up the tool palette. Now we can now click on Sphere 3D, and now we can drag it out. And this is where edit mode comes into play. If we click up here in the UI, top left, then we have edit mode. We can also use the hotkey T for edit mode. You can see it gives us a warning, and now you want to switch out of edit mode, and we do not want to switch out. Navigation is quite simple. In order to pan, we hold down the Alt and right mouse button. In order to rotate, we just use the right mouse button. And in order to zoom, we hold Control and right mouse button. Now, you should be using a tablet, and the pen you're using should already have right mouse button enabled on it. For me, that's the most bottom key on the tablet. So if you don't have that, you should just quickly make sure you have that enabled, because you really want to make sure you're working with a tablet in Zbrush. So Alt right mouse button, and Control right mouse button. If we want to enable perspective, we can hit the P key, or we can go over here as well. Perspective is something you should really work with all the time. And if you want some more specific control over how it draws the actual model using the focal length, we can go into draw, and then we can change it right here. So you can go from the different millimeters. Just make sure you have perspective enabled before doing that. Another tip as well is that we can hover over any feature, and then we can hold on the Control key. So if you want to learn what Make Polymesh 3D does, you can just hover over it and hold down the Control key, and now you can see you get this nice friendly help icon. You can do this for anything here. You can just go over and just hover over and hold the Control key, and you'll get this nice help icon. In order for us to actually work on this, you're going to see if we try to sculpt now, it's not going to allow us to actually sculpt on a model, and that's because we don't have a Polymesh 3D. So what we have to do is we have to go over under Tools and hit Make Polymesh 3D. This is only valid if you're making it from primitives in Zbrush. If you're importing, you don't have to do this. So Tool and Make Polymesh 3D. Now you can see it changes color, and now we can actually sculpt on our model. A concept which can be a bit tricky as well is understanding subdivisions. Subdivisions is a non-destructive way of working, and essentially it means that you can increase the poly count in Zbrush quite significantly while still retaining this low-res base. So if we want to sculpt on this, you can see here that we definitely need more resolution. Instead of remeshing this model in order to allow for that, we can simply subdivide our model. You can do that under Geometry and Divide. So this friendly button right here, if you don't use hotkeys, or you can hit the Ctrl D key to subdivide. And now you can see whenever we hit Ctrl D, you get far, far more precision and resolution in your model. So you can subdivide this quite a few times. 2 million is usually enough for a main model. If you want to subdivide this more, you can go up to something like 50 million polys. That's also fine, but you want to be a bit conservative with your poly count. If you want to go down in subdivision now, you can go to Tool Geometry, and we can go to this slider. We can just slide this all the way down, and now you can see we're back to a low-res model. So if you now want to do some changes to this, maybe you want to do some bigger changes, you can easily do that, and then you can go back up again as well. So let's say you have some really fine sculpting here. You have all this really, specific detailing. You can go down. You can start to change the shape drastically. Go up, and now you still see that it's preserved with subdivisions. Hotkey for going up is the D key, and hotkey for going down is Shift D. So D to go up, and Shift D to go down. This is probably how you want to do it most of the time, so you don't have to be constrained by the interface. Let's just go all the way up so we have something to work with. And let's quickly look into Matcaps. So you can see we have this nasty red material. And I say it's nasty not just from a visual sense, but also because it exaggerates the form so much. You can see here that just on this single stroke, we have a lot of information around it. But this is not what it actually looks like. It exaggerates the form. So if you now try to bring this into Maya, you're in for a hard time because now suddenly you can't see anything. So we need to switch this around. We can change the matcap under matcap red wax. Just click this friendly icon. And now we go to basic material. This is the one I used for the vast majority of the time. Don't worry too much about finding fancy materials. It's really not that important. What's important is that you can see the model in its true shape like this. If you have the basic material as well, we're not technically using matcaps. None of these are matcaps. These are matcaps. On the top one, you can see matcaps and standard materials. If we're using a standard material, we can go to lights, and then we can actually rotate the light around. And now you can see that we can drastically change the look of our model. A little tip as well is that we can go up here to the top right of the interface. And here you see we have this weird little icon. And if we were to just drag on it, you can see that this is actually a person. And the advantage of using this is that we have like front and side views right now. So this is a very handy way of knowing where the front is. So for instance, if you were to model like this and you think this is front, you're actually modeling from like below. So we can just drag this so it's front. And then we know for a fact that we are working on the front view. We start to do our little sculpting right here. So let's look into the common brushes. The first one we look into is the standard brush. That is found if you hit the B key, S, and T. So B, S, T. You can also hit the B key and you can just start looking for it, but it's right there. But I prefer to use the hotkeys for that. B, S, T. And that's a brush which will just do very simple things. It's not a very fancy brush, but it's very useful. Then we have the ClayBuildup brush. B, C, and B. And this is fantastic. This is a lot more advanced in terms of its use case. And this is the one I used by far the most. I'll do like something like 80-90% of my sculpt using the ClayBuildup brush. I also disable the alpha, and then you get this really nice and soft result. Or you can go and set the alpha to something like alpha 06, and that gives you something like in between. It gives you a lot of specificity without giving it this insane softness like with no alpha does. Next up, we have the smooth brush. Smooth brush will simply smooth out what you have. If you hold on the shift key, you can access the smooth brush and it will just smooth down whatever you have, like so. Be a bit careful with this because this tends to destroy your form. So instead of you doing that, I tend to work more with the ClayBuildup brush and really refine my shapes. Instead of just smoothing it out, I tend to just set the intensity lower and lower and lower. Then we have the DamStandard brush, which is B, D, and S. You can see that the hotkeys make sense. B, D, S for brush DamStandard. And this is awesome. This is a really nice brush for us to really get these nice creases. This can be wrinkles. It can be a bunch of different scars. It can be all sorts of different things. You can also hold the Alt key and that will do the opposite of a brush. So now we're actually carving outwards like so. And we get these really nice shapes. So I use this quite a lot as well. This works with any brush. So if you want to do this with the the ClayBuildup brush, you can hold down the Alt key, and this gives us a really nice texture like this because we're holding the Alt and we're carving in like so. In order to change the size of a brush, we can go up here and we can change the draw size, or we can hit the S key for size, and then we can just do it like so. This is how I do it. Whenever I'm changing the brush size, I'm just hitting the S key and I'm just dragging like so. If you want to change the intensity, you can do what I just did up here and set this from like 25 to 5. Or you can hit the U key. U for U-tensity, I suppose. And then we can just change it like so. Something crazy strong to something really low. I actually tend to use the interface up here instead of hitting the U key because then I have to move my hand. And that's a surprising, it requires a surprising amount of effort and will. So I find it easier to just go up here and change that. We can also enable symmetry with the X key. I've remapped this personally to Shift X just because I accidentally hit the X key a lot, but by default it's going to be set to X. You can also find symmetry under transform and activate symmetry, and you can change it right here as well. Let's look into saving. There are a few different ways of saving your work in Zbrush. The best one for me is to save this as a tool. This will simply bring in the model with all the subtools. So essentially what we're seeing here, this is one tool, this is one tool, this is one tool. So if we were to, for instance, make another sphere and make this a polymesh, and if we were to save this tool, it would only save this specific one. It would not save this one, which means it's very nice and clean because a lot of times you have a lot of junk in your entire project. So I prefer to make sure I'm on the actual tool I want. Then we go to Tool and Save As. And then you can save it to wherever directory you want. So we can just save it right here. And then if we want to load it, we can just click on something else just to make sure we're seeing what we just make sure we are loading in the correct tool. Just click on the star, then we'll go Load Tool, and then we can click on it again. And now you can see it loads it in. So we can load in as many versions of this as we want. So now you can see we have the same one right here, which is really useful. So this means, for instance, you can use a reference model as one tool, and you can use the main sculpted version as one tool. You can also save as a project. The project will save the location of the model at the current time. So if you save it like this, it's going to be here. It's not going to be like down here. It will also store what material is enabled, and it will store all the models you have active as well, which is really useful in certain cases, but it can also get very clunky, and sometimes you have a model and you have your model duplicated and you don't realize that it's actually duplicated, and now your files become twice as big to the point that you sometimes can't open it. But if you do want to save it as a project, then you can go to File and Save As, and this will save it as a project. Make sure that undo history is disabled. You don't want to have this included because that is going to save the entire undo history of Zbrush, which is 10,000 steps at a max, which means your file is going to get crazy, crazy big. Now let's look into how we can import our model from an external software. In this case, I have a model which is saved in Maya, and we want to bring this into Zbrush. In order to do this, we should first go to the star. Just click Polymesh 3D. So if you're importing on top of this, it's going to import it and replace it. So therefore we use it on something like this, which will just be a duplicate of the main star. So in this case, we have the Polymesh 3D, just a star. We click on Tool Import, and then we can find the OBJ. You should really be working with OBJs if you're importing. You don't want to deal with anything else, just OBJs for now. And then we can import our file like this. And there you can see we have our file. So in this case, you can see that we have some poly painting enabled as well. Now the poly painting is changed by actually changing the color down here. But in this case, it's baked into the model. So what we have to do, we have to go to Subtool. We can click this little brush icon, and now you can see we can disable the poly paint. Or we can go to Tool, and we can go to Poly Paint right here. And we can disable Colorize. So that's how we import our model into Zbrush. If you want to export your model, you go to Export, Tool Export, and then you just find the location and you just save it right here. Now, a caveat here, which is really annoying. If you are bringing this into Maya and you have polygroups enabled, meaning a case like this, where if you hit Shift F, you can see the polygroups, and you have different groups like this, this is going to break Maya like crazy. So if you are importing your model into Maya from Zbrush, you're exporting from Zbrush, you should go to Tool, Export, and disable group. This one is really important, otherwise it's going to explode in Maya. Now there are some tricks of going around this. One of them is you can disable all polygroups by you can just hit Ctrl W, and that's going to give you a new polygroup for anything unmasked. So if you want to mask something and hit Ctrl W, that's going to give you a polygroup for that. But we really want to just make sure we don't have any polygroups on our model, or we disable group. And then we go to Tool, Export, and we just set a location for this. If we want to mask something, this is very easy to do. Masking just means that there is an area which is not editable. So if you want to, for instance, work on everything but the ear, we can easily do that. We can, for instance, just hold down the Control key and we can just paint on the ear. And this is going to give us a mask like so. So now you can see we've masked out the ear, which means that we can work on everything but the ear. If you try to sculpt now, you can see that the ear is entirely intact. So that's Control key to paint a mask. If you want to remove a mask, we can hold down Control and Alt, and we can just remove the mask like so. So Control to paint and Control and Alt to remove. If you want to remove this, we can hold down the Control key and click outside the model. So Control and click outside. It's important that you click outside because due to Zbrush weirdness, if you click inside, it blurs the mask, which means that you just destroy your mask in many cases, because now you can see that we can manipulate the area around it as well, like so. If we go under Tool and we go to Masking, we also have some options here as well. For instance, we can view mask, which means that the mask is still there, just that we can't actually see it. We can invert the mask as well. This is handy as well. This is exactly the same thing as clicking, but sometimes you just don't want to learn all the hotkeys. So masking, inverse, will do that. If we want to clear a mask, we can just Control and drag outside the model, and that's going to clear the mask. Or we can click this friendly button. We can also blur the mask by going to blur mask here, or we can sharpen the mask by hitting sharpen mask here as well. So masking, quite simple, and if you don't like hotkeys, just stick to the general masking menu under Tool and Masking. So just Control drag to clear the mask. If you want to hide a portion of your model, you can easily do that as well. This one becomes a little bit tricky in terms of hotkeys, but once you get a hang of it, it's quite simple. The keys you'll be using are Control and Shift, and then you'll just use the left mouse button, meaning you'll just sculpt normally using the tablet. So Control and Shift, and then we can just drag over the model. If we do this, you see it becomes green. So anything which is green is going to be visible. And if you release, everything which is not green is going to be hidden. So this is really useful if you want to only focus on one area of the model. If you want to invert this, we can Control, Shift, and drag outside the model like this. Now you can see we actually inverted our visibility. If you want to hide something, like in this case, maybe we want to hide this area, we can hold on Control and Shift, and then Alt. So Control, Shift, and Alt, and now you essentially have all your fingers on the keyboard. And then we can just release, and now you can see it's being hidden. This does hide on the other side as well, so just be aware of that. Now, if we want to make everything visible again, we can Control and Shift and click. Like I said, a bit tricky when it comes to the hotkeys. So just make sure you go to the description in this video and just to see all the different hotkeys. So just to show you how this is done in a fast and efficient way, Control, Shift, drag over the model to make sure this is hidden. Control, Shift, drag outside the model to invert the selection. Control, Shift, drag while holding down the Alt key. Think about Alt as doing the opposite. This will hide something. And Control, Shift, click will revert back to the regular view as well. We can also enable polygroups just by hitting Shift F as well. You can also see the polygroups down here. This is like a wireframe view, which just gives you a way to see your wireframe and also different polygroups as well. So for instance, if you want to make the nose a different polygroup, you can easily do that. You can just mask out nose, hold on Control key and just mask it out. And then we can hit Control W, and then whatever is masked is going to get a separate polygroup. So if you want to get a better mask, we can just keep painting, just undo, and then we can just Control W, and now you can see we have a very nice mask. And in order to hide something now, or to make only this visible, we Control, Shift, click on the polygroup, and then it's the same thing as before. Control, Shift, drag to invert, Control, Shift, click to make everything visible. Now let's look into Subtools. If we duplicate this guy, We can easily do this by going under Subtool and Duplicate. Now you can see we have two models of it. We'll just move him up just a little bit or move him a bit to the side. We'll talk a bit more about how you can do this in a second. So now we have Subtools, and you can see you have both of them under here. And if you were to save this as a tool, you would save both of these, but you would not save anything else. You can see how many subtools you have as well by seeing the number, which is to the top right of the tool, and you see you have 2, which means you have 2. If you duplicate this again, you have 3. If you want to delete a subtool, you can easily do that by going to Subtool and Delete. And there we just hit the Delete key. And now it's going to say, whoa, this is an undoable operation. Are you sure you want to do this? And if you are sure, then hit Cancel or then hit OK. And now you have deleted this forever. The reason why you can't undo deleting the subtool is because all undos are based on the subtool. So if we now go on this one and we try to sculpt something, and then we go to the other one by clicking on it, and then we sculpt something here, and we try to undo now, you can see that it's just going to undo whatever we did on this model. It's not going to undo the other one. So the undo stack, for better or worse, is based on the subtool you are currently on. If you want to quickly switch between the subtools, you can easily do that by holding down the Alt key and just clicking on it like so. If you want to rename a subtool, you click on the subtools you want and you hit rename. So Modeler 1, and we can call this Modeler 2. Now we go to Tool and we save as, and then we can save this as Head Tool Video. And now you can see something weird happen. The first subtool was actually named Head Tool Video, which is what we just saved it as. And this is the bane of my existence in Zbrush. It means that it's pretty tricky to actually keep like a clean naming convention when it comes to Zbrush, because the top subtool, due to some weird quirk in Zbrush, will always have the same name as the tool you saved it as. So how can we prevent that from happening? Well, we'll put a dummy at the top. So what we can do is we can go to Tool, Subtool, Append, and then we can just append a Polymesh 3D. And then we can put this on the top. So currently you can see we have it on the bottom, and we can move this up just by dragging it, or we can hold on Control and up and down to do it, or we can click here as well. I prefer to just use Control and up and down. I find it a bit more intuitive, but you can also just drag it like so as well. And now if we were to save this, we rename this back to Modeler 1. Save this. You can see that the top one got the name, but the second and the third did not get it. So this is how we get away Zbrush's inane UX design and all the weirdness we have going on with this. You can also copy a subtool as well from one to another. So if you want to copy this model onto another subtool, we can click copy, then we can go to another model and we can hit paste. And then we have both of them like so. But now you can see that we have a problem. We can't actually see the other one. So 2 ways of solving this. First off, we can just hide it by clicking on the eye, or we can hit the solo button. We find this on the bottom right of the interface. And this just solos anything which is currently selected. So if we click on this weird thing, we'll have that. And if we click on Modeler 2, we'll also have that. This is so useful that I've remapped this to the 1 key in my interface. So what if we don't want to solo this out to see it? What if we actually want to move it out? Well, we can use the Move, Scale, and Rotate tool. And in the last few years, Pixology have graciously added this gizmo, which is really nice. This made your life a lot easier. If you haven't used Zbrush in a while, and this is suddenly a new thing, just know that you can go back to the transpose lines by clicking on this icon up here. The hotkey is Y as well, to go between the two. So this is very easy to use. It's simply a gizmo. So if you want to move something to the side, you just click on the gizmo and you just drag it where you want to go. If you want to rotate this a certain degree, you can just move it like so. You can move it, you can scale it up and down by using the scale gizmo. If you want to reset the rotation, you can hold down the Alt key and you can click on this rotation button. And now you can see that the rotation of the gizmo actually changed. If you want to move this back to the center of the model, you can click on Alt and click on this little like Google Maps finder. And this puts it right back in the center. Now, if we want to move the gizmo, we can easily do that as well by holding down the Alt key, and then we can just move it like so. So we can move it and we can rotate it and we can move it just into place, exactly where we want to be. And then reset, hold on the Alt, click on the rotation, hold on Alt and click on the little Google Maps icon. And if we want to move both subtools at once, this used to be a real pain to do, but we have this nice little friendly button all the way to the right, which just says transpose all selected subtools. If we click this, we can now move all of them at once. I'm not navigating now, I'm actually moving them, which is really useful. This is one of these small features which is going to save your butt so many times. Next up, we have layers. Layers is a really useful feature you should really use a lot. We can access layers if we go to Tool, and we go all the way down here, and we have layers. We should only activate a layer when we are on the highest desired subdivision level, which means that if you are currently at this level, meaning we don't have any subdivisions, and you want to keep sculpting on it, that is going to be a problem. So what we have to do, we have to subdivide this model up to the level we want, hit Ctrl D a few times, and now we're at 2.7 mil, which is probably fine. Now, if you want to go further than this later on, you should really subdivide it up to this desired poly count right now. So go to the high subdivision level and make the layer there. Then we can click on this nice layer button. This is the biggest button there is right here. Then we click on new, and now we have a layer. If you want to name the layer, we can click on rename, and we can call this sculpting. And now we can sculpt on a model like so. Beautiful sculpting, I know. And then we can disable it by clicking on the rec button. And then we can click on the eye to actually hide it like so. Now this is a weird quirk as well of Zbrush, because if you want to keep sculpting on the layer and you just keep sculpting now, it's like, whoa, it has deformation layers. You have to enable recording. So in order for you to actually keep working on the layer, you have to be in recording mode, which means you have to click on this little recording icon next to the layer button like so. And then we can keep sculpting on it. But due to Zbrush weirdness, this time as well, we have to go in and we have to disable poly painting. This is due to there was some poly painting actually enabled when we brought in this model. So if you have been dealing with poly painting, you might be seeing this. So if that happens, we go to poly paint, disable colorize, and there we go. So now we have layers and we can keep working on the layers like so. And then we can disable it, and there we go. And just disable colorize again. So be very careful with layers that you aren't going to be subdividing later on. Because if we do that, and we try to subdivide now, it's going to be like, whoa, you can't do that because you're in a layer. So it becomes very tricky. Then you have to do crazy reprojections and all of that. Now, in order to export out displacement maps, this is very easy to do in Zbrush. We go to C plugin, then we can dock this over. We can just hold down, hover over, you see this little icon, and we can drag this all the way to the left. And now we just docked it over like so. And here we have a plugin called Multi-Map Exporter. If we click on Multi-Map Exporter, you can see that we have some settings. If you want to export displacement maps, we click on Displacement. Here we can set subtools. Do you want to export with subtools? Do you want to have merge maps enabled? This is for models which they are sharing the same UV space, but they're on different models. So for instance, if the eyes, it has eyes and they're on the same UV shell as, or in the same UV tile as the main head, then you want to enable merge maps. The size, don't go too crazy on this. You can set it up all the way to 8K, which is the most overkill thing in the world. I usually go to 2K or 4K because the map is so soft. Map border, set this to 16. You definitely want to set flip V, otherwise it's not going to work. Then you have to flip your maps manually. We can go to export options, and here we have file names. And it's very important if you're dealing with UDIMs that you have set this to UDIM. You can just click this a few times in order to get to UDIM. You really want to make sure that's set. Otherwise, you're in for a world of pain if you're dealing with UDIMs. Click OK. Then we go to Displacement Map. And here we can set the subdivision level. Normally, you want this to be set to 1 if that's the level you're exporting out. There's also a thing I didn't mention. When you export out your model, it's exporting out the current subdivision level. So if you're exporting out this now, it's going to be exporting out 2.7 mil. If you go all the way down, Shift D, and you export this out, it's going to be only like 10,000. So make sure you export make sure you set the subdivision level to the same level you export your map. Adaptive, disable this. DP subpix, disable this, set this to 0. Smooth UVs, enable this. 3 channel, you don't have to enable this, that's up to you. 32-bit and EXR, essential. And depending on your pipeline, you want to set this either to 0 or 0.5. You should really not use any values in the middle. So just screen cap these settings and just keep on using them. You don't really have to understand what's going on. You just have to know what settings there are and just be consistent about them. Then otherwise you'll go into deep ZBrush displacement rabbit hole. Another tip as well is that when we are sculpting, and we are sculpting in areas like this, if we just go up a little bit like so, you might experience that if you have a really thin surface like this, that you're going to be going through the surface, and that becomes really, really painful because now we are actually sculpting on both sides. So if you want to make sure you're not sculpting on both sides like this, we can go to Brush, Auto Masking, and here we have something called Backface Masking. And this allows us to not sculpt through. This means that we're only sculpting on one side. So this piece might technically go through because that's what we want, but it's not actually influencing this side of it. So when you're dealing with something like ears, you really, really want to make sure you have backface masking enabled. As a little tip as well, this is actually the custom interface I'm working with most of the time. I have actually loaded up so you can just load between different interfaces like here. But this is the interface I use most of the time, and this is saving me so much time. You can find this interface on flipnormals.com. There's a link to this in the description. This is a perfectly free download, and here you can download this UI, and you can also download my custom hotkeys as well, which just will speed up your life so much. Because here you have all the different items you'll ever need. You have Dynamesh, you have Dynamesh resolution, you have zero measure, you have activate symmetry, delete hidden. You can mirror your model, mirror and weld, subdivisions, close hole, delete higher, delete lower, export, little group icon here as well. So this is just a really handy and refined interface, which is just going to save you a lot of time down the line. So that's it for this video. I really hope you liked this quick recap of ZBrush. And if you are interested in learning more about ZBrush, we highly recommend that you check out our Introduction to ZBrush tutorial. It covers everything we just talked about now, just actually in depth instead of glossing over everything in 30 minutes. We cover everything in around 7.5 hours, and you'll learn really most things about ZBrush in this tutorial. So thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure to leave a comment about what you want to see, subscribe of course, and click the notification bell in order to get notified every single time we put out a new video.